Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Discovery and watched the stars drift past the view screen. His crew had been out here for 3 months now, mapping trade routes and making friends with alien species that humanity had only dreamed about a few years ago. Earth had finally made it to the stars, and Jake felt proud to be part of this new chapter in human history. The galaxy was huge and full of wonders, and the Galactic Council had welcomed humanity with open arms, or at least that's what the politicians back home kept saying. Lieutenant Beth Tyler sat at the tactical station and ran another sensor sweep of the area. They were in the outer reaches now, a region of space that the Council said was neutral territory where anyone could travel freely. 3 other human ships traveled nearby. The Horizon, commanded by Captain Linda Hayes, the Pathfinder, and the Newton. All 4 ships were exploration vessels, lightly armed and built for science rather than combat. Jake had served with Linda for years, and they had become close friends through countless missions together. The comm system crackled to life, and Linda's voice came through with her usual humor. She joked about the endless paperwork that came with first contact protocols, and asked Jake if he wanted to grab coffee when they got back to Earth. Jake smiled and was about to reply when Beth's console started screaming warnings. Dozens of ships had just dropped out of hyperspace all around them, and their weapons were already hot. Jake barely had time to shout orders before the first shots hit the Newton. The exploration ship exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space. Jake watched in horror as 800 souls vanished in an instant. The attacking ships were Krelthan vessels. He could see their reptilian design and the cruel angles of their warships. But this made no sense because the Krelthans were part of the Galactic Council. They were supposed to be civilized. The Pathfinder tried to run but never made it to hyperspace. Plasma bolts tore through its engines and then its hull, and within seconds another 300 humans were dead. Jake screamed at Beth to get them moving, to do anything, but the Discovery was already taking hits. The shields held for now, but they wouldn't last long against this kind of firepower. He could see the Horizon on his screen trying to maneuver, trying to fight back with the few weapons they had, but it was useless. Linda's face appeared on the comm screen and Jake could see the fear in her eyes. She told him to run to get out of here and warn Earth. Behind her, Jake could see her bridge filling with smoke and sparks flying from damaged consoles. She said something else, but the transmission cut off as the Horizon took a direct hit to its main reactor. The ship broke apart in slow motion, pieces of hull and debris spreading out in every direction. Jake felt something break inside his chest as he watched his best friend die. Beth grabbed his arm and shouted that they had to jump now, or they would be next. Jake wanted to stay and fight, wanted to make these monsters pay for what they had done, but he knew she was right. The Discovery couldn't fight 40 warships alone. He gave the order and prayed that the damaged hyperdrive would hold together long enough. The ship lurched and reality twisted around them as they made a blind jump into hyperspace, not even knowing where they would end up. 3 days later, Jake stood in a conference room on Earth and gave his report to President Daniel Carter and the Earth Defense Council. His voice was flat and empty as he described watching 1,100 people die for no reason at all. The Krelthans had not demanded surrender, had not given any warning, had not even bothered to explain why they were attacking. They had simply opened fire on unarmed exploration ships in neutral space and kept shooting until everyone was dead. Admiral Susan Clark listened with a face made of stone, but Jake could see the rage burning in her eyes. She asked questions about the Krelthan tactics and weapons, about their ship numbers and formations. Jake answered everything as best he could, though the memories made him feel sick. President Carter sat quietly through the whole briefing, her hands folded on the table, but Jake could see them shaking slightly. Ambassador Richard Stone was sent to Unity Prime, the massive space station where the Galactic Council met to discuss politics and laws. He carried with him a formal protest and a demand for justice. 1,100 humans had been murdered, and Earth wanted the Krelthans punished. Stone also carried footage of the attack, recorded by the Discovery's sensors before they jumped away. The Council could not deny what had happened. Stone stood before the Council chamber and played the footage for all the assembled species to see. He watched their faces looking for sympathy or anger or anything that suggested they cared about what had happened. Instead, he saw boredom and annoyance, as if he was wasting their time with trivial complaints. High Chancellor Vorath, a being made of pure energy who led the Council, barely glanced at the footage before declaring the session open for discussion. The Krelthan representative, a massive reptilian creature with scales like armor, stood and gave his version of events. He claimed that the outer reaches belonged to the Krelthan Empire by ancient right, and that human ships had violated their territory. He said the attack was justified because humanity had ignored proper warnings. Stone shouted that this was a lie, that the outer reaches were neutral space and no warnings had been given. But the other council members did not seem to care. One by one, the other species gave their opinions. The Zorvathi representative, a being made of living crystal, suggested that humanity should have been more careful about where they sent their ships. The Valkorian ambassador, a floating jellyfish creature, said that new species often made mistakes and this was a learning experience. Others simply remained silent, unwilling to offend the powerful Krelthan Empire over the deaths of a few humans. High Chancellor Vorath finally spoke, and his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. He declared that the council had reviewed the evidence and determined this was a territorial misunderstanding. The Krelthans had acted within their rights to defend what they believed was their space. No sanctions would be imposed and no reparations would be paid. The case was closed and the council would hear no more about it. Stone stood there in shock as laughter rippled through the chamber. Several species were actually laughing at Earth's demands for justice. The Krelthan representative made a joke about how humans should stick to their own solar system if they couldn't handle the dangers of space. Others nodded in agreement. And Stone realized with horror that the galaxy saw humanity as nothing more than weak newcomers who did not deserve respect. He returned to Earth 2 days later and gave his report to President Carter. His voice was bitter as he described the council's mockery and dismissal. They had laughed at Earth's pain, had treated the deaths of 1,100 people as if they meant nothing at all. The council saw humans as insignificant insects, too weak to matter and too new to have earned any consideration. President Carter listened to everything and then dismissed everyone except Admiral Clark. The two women sat alone in the Oval Office and looked at each other for a long moment. Finally, Carter spoke and her voice was cold as ice. She said that if the council would not give humanity justice, then Earth would take it for themselves. The galaxy thought humans were weak and pathetic, easy to bully and kill without consequence. It was time to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The meeting room was buried 300 meters below the surface of Colorado, hidden inside a mountain that most people thought was just a military base. President Carter sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by the most brilliant and dangerous minds that humanity had ever produced. Admiral Clark stood near a massive screen that covered one wall, and her face showed nothing but cold determination. The time for talking was over, and now Earth needed to show its teeth. Dr. Patricia Grant was the first to speak, and her voice carried the weight of secrets that could reshape the galaxy. She was the head of Advanced Weapons Research, a division that officially did not exist on any government records. For the past 5 years, her team had been developing weapons that the peaceful species of the Galactic Council had either abandoned long ago or never imagined were possible. She pressed a button and the screen lit up with technical diagrams that looked like they came from a nightmare. Project Hellfire was the first revelation, and even the hardened military officers in the room felt a chill when they saw the numbers. While the Krelthans were proud of their plasma weapons that burned at 50,000 degrees, humanity had perfected antimatter warheads that released energy equivalent to entire stars. Each warhead contained just a few grams of antimatter suspended in magnetic fields. But when that antimatter touched normal matter, the annihilation would release more destructive power than anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Dr. Grant explained that they had 47 of these weapons ready for deployment, and production facilities could make more if needed. Colonel Andrew Bennett stepped forward next, and his smile was the smile of a predator. He commanded the Special Operations Fleet, a group of ships that had been built in secret shipyards on the dark side of Earth's moon. While humanity had been showing the galaxy their peaceful exploration vessels, Bennett's Team H had been constructing pure warships designed for one purpose: to kill efficiently and without mercy. He pulled up images of sleek, deadly ships that bristled with weapons and carried armor made from composite materials that could withstand incredible punishment. Bennett described the missile swarms that his ships carried, thousands of small autonomous weapons that could overwhelm any defense system, through sheer numbers and unpredictable flight patterns. Each missile had its own basic artificial intelligence that allowed it to adjust tactics in real time, to learn from the behavior of enemy defenses, and to coordinate with other missiles to find weaknesses. The Council species relied on energy shields and thick armor, but Bennett's missiles had been designed specifically to exploit the gaps in those defenses. General Lisa Warren took over the presentation and revealed something that made even President Carter lean forward in surprise. Project Ghostwalker was the crown jewel of human military technology, a stealth system that bent sensor radiation around a ship and made it effectively invisible. The technology used quantum manipulation principles that Council scientists had declared theoretically impossible, but human researchers had not been limited by such pessimism. Warren showed footage of test runs where Ghostwalker-equipped ships had flown through active sensor grids without being detected, had positioned themselves within weapons range of targets that never knew they were there. But the most shocking revelation came from a civilian source. Commander Chris Morgan ran Earth's Cyber Warfare Division, and his background was in computer science rather than military tactics. He stood up and explained something that made several people in the room gasp in disbelief. For the past 3 years, every piece of human technology sold or given to Council species had contained hidden access points built into its core programming. Communications networks, entertainment systems, trade computers, navigation software, and even basic medical equipment all had backdoors that only Morgan's team knew about. Morgan demonstrated his capabilities by accessing the security feeds on Unity Prime itself. The screen showed live footage from inside the Council chamber, from the private quarters of various ambassadors, from the control centers that managed the station's life support and defense systems. He could see everything, control everything, and the Council had no idea. Hundreds of worlds and stations across the galaxy had installed human technology, and every single installation was now a potential entry point for Earth's intelligence operations. The implications were staggering. Earth could gather intelligence from anywhere in Council space, could sabotage enemy systems before battles even began, could shut down entire planetary defense grids with a few keystrokes. Morgan explained that his team had been careful never to abuse this access, never to give any hint that the capability existed, but now it was time to use this advantage. The galaxy thought humans were primitive and harmless, and that misconception had just become their greatest weapon. Admiral Clark took control of the briefing again and outlined the battle plan. Earth would not just strike back at the Krelthans. They would make a statement that would echo across every star system in known space. The attack would be overwhelming and precise, demonstrating capabilities that would force the galaxy to completely reassess their understanding of human military power. 5 battle groups had been assembled in secret, each one commanded by officers who had proven their skill and loyalty. The flagship would be called Vengeance, and it would be commanded by Jake Morrison himself. Morrison had been recovering from his ordeal, haunted by nightmares of watching his friends die. But when Clark offered him the command, he accepted without hesitation. He wanted to be there when the Krelthans learned what it meant to attack humanity. He wanted to look into their eyes and show them that humans protected their own, with a ferocity that the galaxy had forgotten was possible. The Vengeance was unlike any ship Earth had shown to the Council, a pure warship built with every advanced technology that humanity possessed. President Carter listened to all the briefings, and then asked the only question that mattered. She wanted to know if they could win, if Earth could really take on a species that had been spacefaring for thousands of years and had military forces spread across dozens of star systems. Admiral Clark's answer was simple and direct. Yes, they could win, and they would win, because humanity had advantages that the Krelthans could not match. The galaxy had grown complacent and soft, while humans remembered what it meant to fight for survival. The final preparations took 2 weeks. Ships were moved into position, weapons were loaded and tested, and crews trained day and night for the coming battle. Morgan's cyber warfare team infiltrated every Krelthan computer system they could find, mapping out defenses and identifying critical targets. Bennett's stealth ships conducted reconnaissance missions that brought them within scanning range of Krelthan homeworlds, and the enemy never knew they were being watched. Dr. Grant personally supervised the loading of the antimatter warheads, making sure that every safety protocol was followed and every weapon was ready. Jake Morrison spent the night before launch at the Memorial Wall in Houston, where the names of all 1,100 victims had been carved into black granite. He stood there for hours, reading each name and making a silent promise. Their deaths would not be meaningless. The galaxy would learn that human lives had value, that attacking Earth came with a price that few species would be willing to pay. Linda Hayes had been his friend, his colleague, and in some ways the sister he never had. He touched her name on the wall and whispered that he would make this right. The morning of the launch, Morrison stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and looked at his crew. Beth Tyler was there at Tactical, promoted for her quick thinking that had saved the Discovery. Every station was manned by officers who had lost friends or family in the attack, people who understood what they were fighting for. Morrison gave a short speech about duty and justice, about showing the galaxy that humanity would not be victims. Then he gave the order and the fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading toward the Krelthan home system with violence in their hearts. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Draconis Prime system, and for exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. The Krelthan defense grid registered the new arrivals but did not immediately react, because unauthorized jumps happened occasionally and were usually just navigation errors. Those 3 seconds were all Morrison needed to position his ships exactly where he wanted them. And by the time the Krelthans realized these were warships, it was already too late. The Vengeance fired first and the missile swarms launched from every ship in the fleet simultaneously. Thousands of small autonomous weapons accelerated toward the Krelthan defense stations and warships, each one following an erratic flight path that made tracking nearly impossible. The Krelthan targeting computers tried to lock onto the swarm, but there were too many missiles moving in too many different directions. Their point defense systems managed to destroy perhaps 1 missile in 20, but the rest kept coming like a swarm of angry hornets. Morrison watched his tactical display as the first wave of missiles struck home. The Krelthan shields flared bright as they absorbed impacts, but the missiles had not been designed to penetrate shields through brute force. Instead, they carried electromagnetic pulse generators that overloaded shield emitters and created cascading failures across entire defensive networks. Within 30 seconds, half the Krelthan fleet was flying blind with their shields flickering or completely offline. Beth Tyler called out targets with mechanical precision, and her voice carried no emotion at all. She had lost her brother on the Newton, and her face showed nothing but cold calculation as she directed the fleet's firepower. The Vengeance's railgun batteries opened up next, accelerating solid projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic energy of those projectiles was immense, and when they struck Krelthan hulls, they punched through armor like it was paper. Physics did not care about advanced alien metallurgy or energy-resistant coatings. Mass times velocity equaled devastation. The first Krelthan battleship, a massive vessel called the Destroyer's Fang, took 3 railgun rounds through its midsection. The ship broke apart in slow motion as internal explosions tore through deck after deck. Morrison felt nothing as he watched 1,000 Krelthans die. He remembered Linda's face on the comm screen, remembered her final words before the horizon exploded, and he knew that this was justice. The Krelthans had started this war by murdering innocents, and now they were learning what it meant to fight an enemy that hit back. The Krelthan defense fleet tried to regroup and mount a counterattack, but human tactics were too different from anything they had trained for. Council warfare had become ritualized over centuries, with ships exchanging fire at respectable distances while following established rules of engagement. Human warfare was about winning as quickly and efficiently as possible, and rules were for people who could afford to lose. Bennett's stealth ships had been positioned throughout the system for hours before the main fleet arrived, and now they revealed themselves by firing on targets from point-blank range. The Kreltans never saw the stealth ships until weapons. Fire lit up their hulls. Bennett himself commanded one of these ghost ships, and he smiled coldly as his crew destroyed a Krelthan supply depot that was supposed to be safely behind the defensive lines. There were no safe positions in modern warfare, no rear areas where support ships could hide. The Ghostwalker technology meant that human ships could appear anywhere at any time, and the Krelthans had no counter for this capability. Lieutenant Chris Barnes sat at the communication station and broadcast Earth's demands on every frequency the Krelthans used. His message was simple and delivered in a voice that promised terrible things if the demands were not met. Earth required the immediate surrender of everyone who had ordered the attack on human ships. Earth required reparations for the families of the 1,100 murdered people. Earth required the Krelthan Empire to reduce its military to purely defensive forces. Failure to comply would result in the complete destruction of Krelthan military capability and the occupation of their home world. The response came from Warlord Kraxus, the Destroyer himself, the leader of the Krelthan Empire, and the being who had personally ordered the attack on human ships. His face filled the view screen and his reptilian features twisted into what might have been contempt or amusement. He called humans pathetic insects who had gotten lucky with a few primitive weapons. He promised to crush this tiny fleet and then send his armada to Earth itself. He would burn humanity's homeworld and enslave any survivors as a lesson to other weak species about challenging the strong. Morrison listened to the entire transmission, and his expression never changed. When Kraxus finished his threats, Morrison simply nodded to Beth and gave a single order. He told her to deploy the antimatter weapons, and his voice was calm as if he was ordering coffee. Beth's fingers moved across her console, and 3 ships equipped with the most destructive weapons humanity had ever created moved into position. Their targets were the massive orbital shipyards where the Krelthan Empire built its warships. Huge installations that had been constructing vessels for centuries. The antimatter torpedoes launched, and their guidance systems calculated trajectories that would bring them to their targets. Despite the desperate point defense fire, the Krelthans threw everything they had at the incoming weapons, destroying 2 of the 6 torpedoes. But 4 got through. When antimatter meets normal matter, the 2 annihilate each other completely and convert their entire mass into pure energy, according to equations that human scientists had understood for centuries. The Council species had banned antimatter weapons long ago as too destructive, too terrible to use even in the worst wars. Humanity had no such restrictions. The 4 torpedoes struck the shipyards, and the resulting explosions lit up the entire system. The shipyards did not explode in the conventional sense, they simply ceased to exist. Matter converted to energy, to radiation, to light, that temporarily outshone the system's sun. Every Krelthan in the system watched as their military-industrial capacity vanished in 4 blinding flashes. Centuries of construction, thousands of workers, dozens of partially completed warships, all gone in less than a second. The Krelthan fleet froze as their commanders tried to process what had just happened. They had thought humans were using advanced conventional weapons, maybe fusion warheads at the most extreme. Nobody had considered that these newcomers possessed and were willing to use antimatter weapons. The psychological impact was immense, because the Kreltans suddenly realized they were not fighting an inferior species with lucky technology. They were fighting an enemy that had capabilities the Council had abandoned as too dangerous. Morrison did not give them time to recover. He ordered the fleet to continue the assault, and his ships moved deeper into the system. The Krelthan homeworld of Draconis Prime loomed ahead, a massive planet covered in cities and military installations. Bennett's stealth ships were already in orbit and had been mapping targets for hours. They had identified every military command center, every weapons depot, every barracks where Krelthan soldiers trained. Civilian areas had been carefully noted and marked as off-limits because humanity was here to deliver justice, not to commit genocide. The orbital strikes began with surgical precision. Bennett's ships fired kinetic penetrators at military targets on the surface, long rods of dense metal that fell from orbit and struck with the force of tactical nuclear weapons. The kinetic energy alone was enough to destroy hardened bunkers and level entire military complexes. Command centers disappeared in clouds of debris. Weapons manufacturing plants collapsed into rubble. Military spaceports cratered as their landing fields were torn apart. Through it all, not a single civilian building was touched because the targeting was that precise. Warlord Kraxus tried to rally his forces from his command bunker deep beneath the capital city. But Chris Morgan's cyber warfare team had been inside Krelthan computer systems for weeks. They shut down communications, disabled defense grids, and even managed to lock the blast doors on several military facilities to trap soldiers inside. The Krelthans found themselves blind and helpless as their own technology turned against them. Morgan sat in his station on the Vengeance and worked his magic, his fingers dancing across holographic keyboards as he systematically dismantled the Krelthan military infrastructure. 6 hours after the first shot, the battle was over. 40 Krelthan warships had been destroyed or crippled. Their shipyards were gone. Their command structure was in chaos. Their orbital defenses were smoking ruins. Their ground military facilities were craters. Human casualties stood at exactly 0. Not one Earth ship had been destroyed. Only 3 had taken any damage at all, and those injuries were minor. Morrison looked at his tactical display and felt a grim satisfaction. This was what happened when you attacked humanity. This was the price of murdering innocent explorers. Warlord Kraxus finally appeared on the comm screen again, but this time, his face showed no contempt or amusement. His scales had paled to a sickly gray color, and his voice shook as he formally surrendered on behalf of the Krelthan Empire. Morrison accepted the surrender and transmitted Earth's terms. They were harsh and non-negotiable. Kraxus and every officer who had been involved in ordering the attack on human ships would be handed over to Earth authorities. The Krelthan Empire would pay 3% of its gross planetary product in reparations for the next 20 years. The Krelthan military would be reduced to system defense forces only, and human observers would monitor compliance. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the proud Krelthan Empire submitted to every single demand. The news of the Krelthan defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by merchants and diplomats who could barely believe what they were reporting. Within days, every species in Council space knew that humanity had destroyed one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy in less than 6 hours, without losing a single ship. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session on Unity Prime, and the chamber was packed with representatives demanding answers and solutions. High Chancellor Vorath called the session to order, and his voice carried a tension that few had ever heard from the ancient energy being. Ambassador. Richard Stone received his summons to appear before the Council in answer for Earth's actions, and this time he arrived with a full security detail of human Marines in combat armor. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer asking for permission or begging for respect. Stone walked into the Council chamber with his head high and his expression calm, and he noticed immediately that the atmosphere had changed. The species that had mocked him weeks ago now watched him with careful eyes, and several representatives shifted nervously in their seats as he passed. The trial began with accusations flying from every direction. The Zorvathi representative Solaris stood first, and his crystalline body pulsed with agitated colors as he spoke. He called Earth's attack on the Krelthans an act of brutal aggression that violated every principle the Council stood for. He claimed that humanity had used disproportionate force and had demonstrated a savage nature that threatened galactic peace. Other species joined in with their own condemnations, each one trying to paint Earth as a dangerous threat that needed to be contained or punished. Stone listened patiently to every accusation, and his face showed nothing but mild interest. He waited until the last speaker had finished and the chamber had fallen silent. Then he stood and walked to the center of the floor where a holographic projector waited. He activated the system without asking permission, and the footage from the original attack on human ships began to play. The Council had seen this before, but Stone made them watch it again. Every explosion, every death, every moment of the unprovoked massacre that had started this whole situation. When the footage ended, Stone turned to face High Chancellor Vorath directly. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. He reminded the Council that he had stood in this exact spot weeks ago and begged for justice. He had shown them proof of Krelthan aggression and asked for sanctions, for reparations, for any acknowledgement that human lives mattered. The Council's response had been to laugh at him, to mock Earth's weakness, and to declare the murder of 1,100 innocent people a simple misunderstanding. Stone then played the recording of that previous Council session. The assembled representatives watched themselves dismiss human concerns, watched themselves joke about Earth's powerlessness, watched themselves treat the deaths of over 1,000 souls as if they meant nothing at all. Several Council members looked away in shame, but Stone was not finished. He pointed out that the Council had taken no action whatsoever to punish the Krelthans or to prevent future attacks. By their inaction and their mockery, the Council had made it clear that human lives had no value in their eyes. Earth had simply responded to that message. If the Council would not protect human citizens, then Earth would protect them itself. Stone pulled up statistics from the Krelthan operation and displayed them for everyone to see. 40 military vessels destroyed, 0 civilian casualties, military installations neutralized with precision strikes that avoided population centers. Even in the heat of battle, Humanity had followed rules of engagement that minimized suffering and targeted only legitimate military objectives. The Kreltons had murdered unarmed explorers without warning. Earth had fought a war with honor and restraint even while delivering overwhelming force. Then Stone revealed what truly made the Council afraid. Commander Chris Morgan appeared as a hologram beside Stone, and his young face wore a slight smile. Morgan explained that he would now demonstrate Earth's intelligence capabilities, and before anyone could object, the chamber's holographic systems came online. Suddenly, every council member could see feeds from their own private quarters, their secure communication channels, even the defense control systems that protected Unity Prime itself. Morgan showed them camera angles from inside the council's most secret facilities and displayed transcripts of conversations that were supposed to be encrypted beyond any possibility of interception. The panic in the chamber was immediate and intense. Representatives jumped from their seats and shouted questions or demands. How long had Earth been spying on them? What else had humans infiltrated? Were they in danger right now? Morgan let them panic for a few moments before explaining calmly that every piece of human technology installed throughout Council space contained hidden access points that his team controlled. Trade computers, communication networks, entertainment systems, medical equipment, navigation software, everything. Earth had eyes and ears everywhere, and the Council had never suspected a thing. Several species representatives immediately demanded that all human technology be removed from their worlds and stations, but Stone stopped them with a simple gesture. He explained that Earth had no hostile intentions toward any species that treated humanity with basic respect and dignity. The access points would remain dormant as long as Earth's citizens were safe and its sovereignty was respected, but they served as insurance, a guarantee that no species could attack humanity without consequence. The galaxy now knew that Earth could strike, back not just with military force but with information, warfare that could cripple entire civilizations. President Daniel Carter appeared as a hologram in the center of the chamber, and her presence commanded immediate attention. She spoke directly to the assembled council, and her words were chosen carefully. She explained that Earth did not seek to dominate or conquer anyone. Humanity simply wanted to live peacefully among the stars and to be treated with the same respect that other species enjoyed. The response to the Krelton attack had been harsh, yes, but it had also been just. The Kreltons had committed murder and received punishment. That was how civilized societies were supposed to work. Carter proposed a new treaty that would govern Earth's relationship with the Council species. The terms were simple and fair. Any attack on human vessels, citizens, or territory would be considered an act of war and would be met with immediate and overwhelming military response. In exchange, Earth pledged never to initiate hostilities against any species and to use its military power only in self-defense or in defense of allies. She also offered to share some of Earth's defensive technology with Council species that signed the treaty, helping to maintain galactic peace through mutual strength rather than through fear. The Council had little choice but to accept. Behind closed doors after the public session ended, High Chancellor Vorath requested a private meeting with Ambassador Stone. The two beings sat alone in a small conference room, and for the first time, Vorath spoke without the formal language required in official sessions. He admitted that the Council had indeed viewed humanity as insignificant and unworthy of serious consideration. Earth was new to space travel, had no ancient history of galactic politics, and seemed weak compared to species that had been exploring the stars for thousands of years. That assessment had been catastrophically wrong. Vorath explained that the Council had grown complacent over centuries of relative peace. Wars still happened, but they followed predictable patterns and rarely resulted in major shifts in power. The Council species had forgotten what real warfare looked like, had forgotten what it meant to fight an enemy that combined advanced technology with the will to use it without hesitation. Humanity had reminded them, and the lesson had been delivered with brutal clarity. Stone listened and then asked the obvious question. What would happen now? Would the Council try to suppress Earth's growing power? Would they attempt to form coalitions against humanity? Vorath's response was surprisingly honest. He said that some species would probably try exactly that, but they would fail. Earth had demonstrated capabilities that made direct confrontation far too risky. More importantly, several Council species were already approaching Earth seeking alliances and protection. The galactic power structure was shifting, and Vorath was wise enough to recognize that fighting this change would only make things worse. The new treaty was ratified by unanimous vote 3 days later. Every council species signed the document promising mutual non-aggression and respect for human sovereignty. Several species that had been considering aggressive expansion quietly abandoned those plans because the Krelton example had shown what happened to those who attacked others without provocation. The galaxy was entering a new era, one where Earth stood as a major power that demanded and received respect. Stone returned to Earth after the treaty signing and gave his report to President Carter. He described the fear he had seen in the council chamber, the way even powerful species now spoke carefully about humanity. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Earth protected its own with a ferocity that shocked species which had grown soft over centuries of ritualized warfare. No one would make the mistake of dismissing humanity again. 6 months passed since the Krelton incident, and the galaxy had settled into a new reality where Earth stood as a major power that nobody dared to challenge. Captain Jake Morrison returned home to crowds cheering his name and calling him a hero, but he rejected those labels every time someone used them. He gave a speech at the memorial service in Houston, where the names of 1,100 victims were carved into black granite, and his words were simple and direct. He told the gathered families that their loved ones had not died for glory or conquest, but to teach the galaxy a lesson it desperately needed to learn. Morrison explained that Earth's response had never been about revenge in the petty sense of the word. It had been about justice and about ensuring that no other human explorers would die simply because the galaxy viewed humanity as weak and disposable. He touched the name of Linda Hayes on the memorial wall and spoke about how she had loved exploring the stars, how she had believed in the dream of peaceful cooperation between species. Her death and the deaths of all the others had forced Earth to show its teeth, but the goal had always been to make sure such deaths never happened again. The Krelton Empire had undergone dramatic changes since the defeat. Warlord Kraxus the Destroyer now sat in a human prison facility on a moon orbiting Jupiter, convicted of ordering the murder of 1,100 innocent people. His trial had been broadcast across the galaxy, and every species had watched as human justice was carried out with meticulous fairness. Kraxus had been given lawyers, had been allowed to present his defense, and had been judged by a jury of his peers. The verdict was guilty, and the sentence was life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The new Krelton leadership was younger and more diplomatic than their predecessors. General Verkesh had taken control after the military coup that overthrew the old guard, and his first act was to formally apologize to Earth for the unprovoked attack. He met with President Carter in a historic summit on neutral ground, and the two leaders spent 3 days negotiating a new relationship between their peoples. Verkesh admitted that Krelton culture had always valued strength and aggression, but Earth had taught them that true strength included knowing when not to fight. Surprisingly, many Krelthans had developed a grudging respect for humanity's response. Their culture valued warriors who fought for their tribe, who protected their own with absolute ferocity, and Earth had demonstrated exactly those qualities. Young Krelthan soldiers studied human tactics in their military academies, and several exchange programs had been established where Krelthan and human officers trained together. The species that had been enemies 6 months ago were slowly becoming allies bound by mutual respect earned through combat. Dr. Patricia Grant's advanced weapons research division had been expanded significantly after the success of the Krelthan operation. Her budget had tripled, and she now commanded facilities on Earth, Mars, and 3 orbital stations dedicated to developing next-generation military technology. Several council species had quietly approached Earth seeking to purchase or license human weapon systems, particularly the Ghost Walker stealth technology and the missile swarm platforms. Each request was evaluated carefully because Earth had no interest in becoming an arms dealer to the galaxy. However, strategic alliances were being formed. The Valturin Confederacy, a collection of smaller species that had been bullied by larger powers for centuries, signed a mutual defense treaty with Earth. In exchange for human military protection, the Valturins provided access to rare minerals that Earth needed for its expanding fleet. Admiral Susan Clark personally oversaw the training of Valtoran defense forces, teaching them human tactics and providing them with weapons that would allow them to defend themselves against future aggression. The Earth Defense Fleet had grown from a small collection of exploration vessels to a formidable military force that rivaled the largest fleets in Council space. New shipyards orbited Earth and Luna. Construction facilities on Mars worked around the clock, and the asteroid belt had been transformed into a massive industrial complex. Ships rolled out of the yards every week, each one incorporating the lessons learned from the Krelthan campaign. The Vengeance had become the flagship of a fleet that now numbered over 200 warships, and more were being built constantly. Commander Chris Morgan's Cyber Warfare Division had become Earth's most valuable intelligence asset. The network of access points throughout Council space provided humanity with information that shaped diplomatic and military decisions at the highest levels. But Morgan himself had grown uncomfortable with the power he wielded. He could spy on anyone, could sabotage any system, could essentially control the digital infrastructure of half the galaxy. He began pushing for oversight and ethical guidelines, arguing that such power needed checks and balances even in times of peace. President Carter agreed and established the Intelligence Oversight Committee, a group of civilian leaders who would monitor cyber warfare operations and ensure they remained within ethical bounds. Morgan welcomed the oversight because he understood that power without accountability eventually corrupted even the best intentions. Earth's military might was growing, but its democratic values and respect for individual rights remained the foundation of human civilization. Colonel Andrew Bennett's Special Operations Fleet had become legendary across the galaxy. His stealth ships conducted training exercises with allied species, teaching them advanced tactics and building relationships that strengthened Earth's diplomatic position. The sight of human Ghostwalker vessels operating alongside former Council members represented the new galactic order where strength and cooperation went hand in hand. Bennett himself had become an ambassador of sorts, using military exchanges to build bridges between cultures. The Galactic Council itself had been reformed under pressure from Earth and several other species that had been marginalized under the old system. A new impartial justice system had been created to handle disputes between species, with judges drawn from multiple civilizations and strict protocols to prevent powerful species from simply doing as they pleased. Ambassador Stone had pushed for these reforms relentlessly, arguing that the Council's previous dismissal of human concerns had directly led to the violence that followed. Several younger species that had been treated poorly by the Council approached, Earth seeking protection and alliance. The Milvani, a species of small furry beings with incredible engineering skills, offered to share their technology in exchange for human military support against aggressive neighbors. The Torth, aquatic creatures whose ocean worlds had been raided by pirates for decades, asked Earth to help establish security in their space. Humanity carefully cultivated these relationships, finding willing partners among those who had also been dismissed and underestimated. The story reached its conclusion with President Carter giving her State of the Union address from the Capitol building in Washington. She spoke to a joint session of Congress, but her words were broadcast across Earth and to human colonies throughout the solar system. She reflected on the journey humanity had taken from first contact to the present day. Earth had left its home system with hope and optimism, had been met with mockery and violence, and had responded with a demonstration of power that changed the galactic order forever. Carter emphasized that humanity's goal had never been domination or empire. Earth simply demanded respect and the right to exist without fear. The galaxy had learned that humans were neither conquerors nor victims. They were survivors who would defend their own with every resource at their disposal, but who also sought peace and cooperation with those who treated them fairly. The Krelthan incident had been a tragedy that cost 1,100 lives. But from that tragedy had come a new understanding that would protect future generations. The camera view pulled back to show Earth's orbital space crowded with ships and stations. The planet that had once been alone in the universe now commanded a growing sphere of influence across dozens of star systems. Among the military vessels, a new ship caught the light of the sun. It was called Discovery, built to honor Jake Morrison's original vessel that had survived the Krelthan ambush. This new Discovery was larger and better armed than its predecessor, designed for exploration but capable of defending itself against any threat. Morrison stood on the bridge of this new Discovery and looked at the stars displayed on the view screen. Beth Tyler sat at the tactical station just as she had on the original ship, and she had been promoted to first officer for her service during the crisis. The crew around them was young and eager, ready to explore unknown regions of space and make new discoveries. Morrison felt something he had not felt in months: hope for the future. Beth asked if he was ready to explore uncharted space again after everything that had happened. Morrison smiled for the first time since the attack, and his answer reflected the journey humanity had taken. He said that Earth had proven it could fight when necessary, had shown the galaxy that attacking humans came with terrible consequences. But fighting was not who humanity truly was at its core. Humans were explorers and builders, scientists and dreamers who looked at the stars and wondered what waited out there. The Discovery jumped to hyperspace, heading toward unknown regions where perhaps humanity's better nature could shine through. The ship carried weapons and armor sufficient to handle any threat, but it also carried scientific instruments, cultural exchange programs, and the hope that not every first contact would end in violence. Morrison knew that Earth would never hesitate to protect its people again if threatened, but he also believed that the galaxy was big enough for cooperation and wonder. Behind them, Earth continued to build and grow and prepare. The memory of 1,100 lost souls remained carved in granite and embedded in the collective consciousness of humanity. Those deaths had taught the galaxy a lesson about underestimating Earth, but they had also taught humanity about the price of exploration and the value of strength tempered with wisdom. The Galactic Council was no longer speechless. They had learned to listen when Earth spoke, and that respect had been earned through blood and fire and the determination to never be victims again.